Dr. Elizabeth Athens, an art historian and former Bartram Trail Conference Fothergill Award recipient, just like Taylor. Where'd he go? Here's two. All right, congratulations. And me as well, way back when. Will be our keynote speaker for this meeting. She received her PhD from Yale University. Her research interests include 18th and 19th century art and natural history, the art of empire, and the history of collecting. She is currently Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Connecticut. Among her many publications are William Bartram's Visual Wonders, The Drawings of an American Naturalist. And I'll mention that I've been on this and was outbid, and I'm not at all pleased by that. This book, Visual Wonders, is the recipient of the Athenaeum of Philadelphia's 2024 Literary Award in Nonfiction. Her presentation tonight is entitled Imagining Other Lives, Plant and Animal Perspectives in the Work of William Bartram. Welcome, Dr. Athens.
This is my second Bartram Trail Conference, as I think Matt pointed out, and it's always a lively bunch. Like, you guys are a bit of a live wires, so I enjoy that. And I am so happy to be here, so honored. I'm grateful to the Bartram Trail Conference, also for the support, the Fothergill Research Award back in 2016. That award and the conference in Baton Rouge was really my first experience with the Bartram Trail conference community, and it's just wonderful to spend this time with other Bartram enthusiasts and to meet so many of you. This is actually where I first met Catherine Brond, Dorinda Dahlmeyer, Tom Halleck, and they've all been really valuable interlocutors as we all think through the Bartrams together. Somebody else that I'd like to mention before I get into the meat of my talk is, of course, Joel Fry, the storied curator of Bartram's Garden, whose absence leaves such a terrible void in Bartram studies. He was always doggedly tenacious in studying the Bartrams and incredibly generous in studying the Bartrams. And you know, there's no replacing Joel.
Amen.
So as we all know, studying William Bartram is sort of like passing a light through a multifaceted prism. And you know, you end up touching on such disparate topics as, you know, the cultural histories of Native communities of the Southeast, developments in early American landscape design, the emergence of science in the early Republic, all of these sorts of things. For today's talk, I'd like to focus on another sliver of Bartram's output, his visual representations of the natural world. William Bartram's drawings of nature are not simply disinterested depictions of the flora and fauna that he encountered during his lifetime, but were vehicles for him to imagine other lives that were as complex as, yet distinct from, his own. His study of the natural world moved him inevitably to a recognition that humanity was not at the apex of some sort of great chain of being, an idea that had structured natural history investigation for centuries. As his drawings indicate, he came to see nature as this finely wrought web, and to consider each node in that web, whether human, flora, or fauna, as being of equal significance, with every organism experiencing life on its own terms and in its own rich and vivid way. William Bartram had been raised to be a botanizing companion to his father, John, and it was through his father's guidance and training that he was introduced to the study of nature, as well as to the network of amateur and professional naturalists who would shape his life and career. As early as 1753, at just 14 years old, he accompanied his father on a trip to Fort Montgomery, New York, on his first extended botanizing excursion, and it was in this decade, too, that he began making drawings for his father's colleagues in England. As most of you know, the plants that John collected on these botanizing excursions were propagated in the family garden back in Kingsessing, now Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and served as the basis of the Bartram boxes of American exotics that they sent to subscribers. By 1755, John was describing drawing as William's darling delight, though the early works William produced tended to hew closely to established models for natural history illustration. One of these models was to present a specimen isolated against a blank background with its distinctive features highlighted. An example of this, as you see here, his is on the left. I have a little, boom, there it is. Over here, well, you get it. It's the one on the left. An example of this is his depiction of the red maple, which may well have been a response to a print published to accompany the Gardener's Dictionary, a book that was written by the keeper of London's Chelsea Physic Garden, Philip Miller. In the Miller image, which is on the right, the leaves are incorrectly portrayed, as Joel Fry pointed out to me. He's like, those are really more like silver maples than red maples. And I was like, yes, I believe you, Joel. And the flower is sort of an odd invention that does not accord with either the tree's male or female blooms. In his drawing of the red maple, William depicted two branches, one for the tree's male flowers and the other for the female. The male blooms possess this kind of nimbus of stamens that suggests the plant's dynamic bursting forth from its winter dormancy, while the female flowers are heavy with pollen collecting styles. He even included these excerpted kind of details in order to see the flower's organs of reproduction more clearly. In his close descriptive attention to the flowers, Bartram leaned toward a specifically Linnaean method of natural history representation here. Beginning in the late 1730s, the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus had introduced a new taxonomy for organizing plant life, in which the flower, fruit, and seed would become absolutely essential in identifying a plant. Though he was only 17 when he made this drawing, he seems to have ascertained key characteristics of the red maple with greater detail and accuracy than Miller, one of England's most celebrated botanical authors. A second model of natural history illustration that Bartram adopted was that used by the well-known authors and artist-naturalists Mark Catesby and George Edwards, who were both correspondents of his father, and of course, George Edwards was a correspondent of William Bartram himself. Catesby and Edwards were known for creating picturesque tableaux, these sort of little dioramas that emphasized pose and environment to make their scenes appear visually interesting, or in the words of George Edwards, natural and agreeable. In fact, some of Bartram's earliest drawings were made specifically for Edwards, as with his portrayal here of the northern harrier, or as he called it, the marsh hawk. Created around the same time as his drawing of the red maple, this work is at once a service to Edwards and an homage to Catesby, who had died in 1749. Here we see that he included a bobolink or rice bird taken from Catesby's Natural History of Carolina, Florida, and Bahama Islands as the marsh hawk's prey. It's a little bleak down here, thereby creating a neat, if gory, little narrative. Edwards reproduced Bartram's drawing as plate 291 in his book, The Gleanings of Natural History, noting that although he himself had not seen the bird in life, he had, quote, great reason to believe Mr. Bartram very correct in his drawing and exact in his coloring, having compared many of his drawings with the natural subjects and found a very good agreement between them. Surely we can see how truthful and accurate Bartram was by comparing his drawing to Edwards' etching. For some reason, Edwards transformed Bartram's sleek huntress into this kind of pudgy little bird, one that is broader in the breast and shorter in the tail and leg, kind of more like a partridge than a hawk. Still, as eager as William was in his study of both the works of natural history, of nature and of natural history, being an artist-naturalist was not initially in the cards for him. He was apprenticed to a Philadelphia merchant, and then he attempted to establish himself in business in North Carolina, and we all heard how that went. When he struggled to turn a profit, he decided to become a Florida planter, an enterprise that met an even more ignoble end. It was only after these failed professional endeavors that he began to pursue drawing with single-minded focus. This was also when he began to break from the precedents established by earlier artist naturalists and began to articulate in his drawings a dazzling natural world of various sort of subjective experiences, animal and vegetable, kind of each organism experiencing life on its own terms. So the drawing that I see as marking this initial break with precedent is perhaps one of his best known. And I say this about the drawings that I write about because to me they're the best known, but you guys might all have other favorite ones, but this is one of mine. So this is his representation of the American lotus, or the Nelumbo lutea. In July 1767, his father's most important correspondent and patron, the London mercer Peter Collinson, requested a drawing of this plant, which he believed to be synonymous with the sacred lotus of Asia, or the Nelumbo nucifera. To confuse matters even more, Collinson and his correspondents typically refer to the plant as colocasia, which is a term that I'll use throughout this talk. And also, I was talking to Joel about this, about how they thought the Nelumbo lutea and Nelumbo nucifera were the same plant, because they did. He's like, no, they're not at all the same plant. I'm like, I know that, Joel, and you know that, but they didn't know that. But I loved how he's like, no, you are falling into botanical error, Betsy, and you must be corrected. And I mean, that would have been botanical error. So anyway, Collinson had tried to establish this plant in his garden at Mill Hill outside of London, but he had little success. He was not able to propagate it. So he asked Bartram for a, quote, picturesque figure of the plant with special attention paid to its flower, fruit, and seed. In a sense, he was requesting a fusion of a tableau and a Linnaean illustration so that he might gain a better sense of the plant in its environment, as well as locate it within Linnaeus's taxonomic system. In response, Bartram produced this, which indeed provides a picturesque figure, but one unlike anything he had done before, and surely unlike anything Peter Collinson would have expected. The scene is not, as with Catesby or Edwards, a simple tableau that we observe kind of from the outside as though examining a diorama. The sense of space and scale is really, I'm going to have this up for a while, spend some time looking at it. It's really weird. It's just utterly disorienting. And our position within the scene is bewildering and ambiguous. Do we hover over the scene to see the flat lotus leaves floating on the water's surface? Or are we situated on our bellies at the water's edge so that the flowers tower over us? If we are crouched low on the banks of the pond, we are kept company by a great blue heron. Yet this inclusion is also pretty strange. This unusually large bird, typically about 4 feet in height, is shrunken to this tiny little figure. It looks like it's going to be enfolded by the lotus leaf behind it. Are we, too, in miniature? The strange sense of space and scale that Bartram created here wholly upends our experience of the natural world. We cannot really be outside the scene, viewing with an omniscient eye. Instead, we are inserted into this natural tableau in a way that is dynamic and even unsettling. We are forced not simply to observe, but to experience it. Moreover, ours is not the only experience articulated within the drawing's borders. For instance, the great blue heron is not simply an addendum to the scene, but is active, engaged, pursuing a minuscule little fish at the water's edge. And for the eagle-eyed among you, you may have noticed that this portrayal of the great blue heron is a direct visual citation of plate 135 from Edwards' A Natural History of Uncommon Birds, which I showed in an earlier slide. The heron's focused act of pursuit is echoed in the Venus flytrap along the left edge of the drawing, which tracks its quarry in its own way, patiently awaiting the dragonfly to alight unsuspectingly on its lobes. In this drawing, Bartram provided the Linnaean particulars that Collinson requested. We see a bud, a fully blown bloom, and a developing fruit full of seeds. And I just want to take a second and point out, here is the fruit full of seeds. So it's just this tiny little cone here. Let me see if I can, it's right there. But he does this in a way that undermines the essentializing project of Linnaean taxonomy. We are not presented with an inert world that we can take apart, articulate, and then reassemble. Rather, we are forced to acknowledge a world where plants and animals are dynamic living beings with attention and agency. Agency that they use to pursue their own ends, irrespective of our interests and aims. By upending space and scale in his drawing, Bartram is able to re-enchant the natural world, forcing us to see and experience it almost as if for the first time. In another one of Bartram's better-known drawings, which we've already seen today, of course, his rendering of the Alachua savanna, we see him take this strange sense of space and scale to its farthest extent. As we can see here, it is not a fully aerial, abstracted cartographic view, but instead borrows the high horizon of many 16th and 17th century maps, made popular in Georg Braun and Franz Hogenberg's 6-volume Civitates Orbis Terrarum. These volumes formed a compendium of city and town views from around the world, and the illustrations tended to emphasize key topographical and architectural features. In the foreground, there are often groups of figures which kind of serve as a way of indicating that the details depicted in the map are known via direct observation rather than through abstract geometry. These maps are supposed to be born of direct personal experience of these sites. In his drawing of the savanna, which of course we now know is Payne's Prairie, Bartram adopted the use of foreground figures, except instead of humans, he situated a savanna crane in the lower left corner, who becomes our point of entry for the scene. This is our only true moment of spatial stability, since, as in the Colocasia drawing, we are soon untethered, floating above the aerial flatness of the savanna. The inconsistent scale of the flora and fauna that dot the drawing's center reinforces our lack of groundedness. Even as the map suggests a totalizing view, its spatial incongruities disrupt any pretense to comprehensive knowledge. We are forced to understand that there can never be a single omniscient view, only an accretion of perspectives. As Tom Halleck has so aptly observed in regard to Bartram, the search for perspective becomes its own theme. And these perspectives, notably, are not merely human. In this drawing, we are asked to identify not with a person, but with a bird. We are asked to imagine ourselves not only earthbound, but airborne, like the crane's soaring compatriots in the upper right corner of the image. Pointing up the agency and experience of animals and even plants is a concern that threads throughout Bartram's work. In his insistent attribution of agency to plants and animals and his attempts to imagine their experiences from their perspectives, Bartram was likely influenced by Henry Baker's The Microscope Made Easy, an enormously popular book at mid-century and one that we know was owned by his father. Throughout his own writings, Bartram liberally adapted passages from this, so we see wording that is almost exactly like that in Microscope Made Easy, just highlighting the influence this book had on him. He was particularly interested in the sense of wonder opened up by the microscope, which can help us see how artful, how beautifully crafted the works of nature are. Some of the examples cited are evidence specifically of God's handiwork, so his ability to make the sting of a bee finer and more delicate than the point of a needle, but others indicate the scale of the organism, as in the likening of a silkworm's web to Brussels lace. Such rhetorical moves challenge a hierarchical chain of being. The beauty and elegance of even the meanest natural productions, or even the meanest organism, provides, in Baker's words, quote, convincing proofs of their not being so insignificant as we presumptuously suppose they are. The agency that Bartram identified in various organisms is brilliantly explored in another of his drawings from this period, that of the Mamordica carantia, or balsam pear, made for his most important patron, the Quaker physician John Fothergill. On first glance, the drawing seems much more standard than either his depiction of the Colocasia or his rendering of the Alachua savanna. It offers none of that bewildering sense of space or scale, no competing perspectives. But when we compare it to a Linnaean illustration of the same plant, its sense of animation and agency become wildly explicit. Take, for an example, an engraving by John Miller from his illustration of the sexual system of Linnaeus. Here, the plant is shown whole, but also dissected, dismembered, pulled apart into its component parts. The flower appears to have been flayed with mathematical precision, the better to articulate its key features according to the Linnaean system, while the fruit has been sliced in half to reveal its interior structure. These details are all encased in sort of a vacuum-like space, this nondescript, hermetic kind of nowhere, neither interacting with one another or with the viewer. Miller's illustration depicts a balsam pear that has been selected, arranged, and taken apart by the naturalist, a lifeless object to observe rather than a living specimen. In Bartram's much more dynamic drawing, he depicted 3 of the plant's fruit at different points of maturation. So up at the very top, there's this tiny little pear, and then there's that bursting one below, and then there's kind of a tween in between the two. And although his drawing is similar in some respects to Miller's print, it really demands close, careful attention to locate the flowers, which are absolutely essential details in assessing it according to the Linnaean system. Several flowers are included in the top quarter of the drawing, but they are almost indistinguishable from the leaves. Actually, I think I was looking at this drawing for years before I was like, oh, there are flowers in there. So like you can't really see the calyces, and you can't see the pistils or stamens at all, which are details that you would absolutely need. Instead, Bartram lavished attention on the balsam pear's fruit, its hand-like leaves, and its coiling cirri, which yield little taxonomic information by themselves. While the details of the composition do not aid in a Linnaean description of the balsam pear, they do convey a sense of its animacy. In his travels through North and South Carolina, Georgia, East and West Florida, Bartram presented this plant as an exemplar of plant animacy, listing it as among those genera whose cirri extend, quote, like the fingers of the human hand reaching to catch hold of what is nearest, just as if they had eyes to see with. The curving and twisting lines of the cirri do not just give this object a sense of animation, but indicate that the plant is self-aware and self-moving rather than animated by an exterior force. Moreover, this Memortica is consciously oriented toward the viewer, as though willfully placing itself on display. The pitching leaves appear to flag the viewer's attention, while the large pear's broken, peeling skin seems almost a curious vegetal striptease as it lifts its pericarp to reveal its seeds. Bartram wrote an extended description on the back of this drawing to underscore the balsam pear's uncanny sense of agency. He described how the fruit, when ripe and ready, splits open with great elasticity, disclosing a scene of still greater beauty and wonder. The active quality of the plant, not disclosed, but disclosing, upends the relationship between observing naturalist and observed specimen, as its beauty and wonder is accessed only through the plant's acts of self-display. The balsam pear was among a larger parcel of drawings and plants that the Bartram family sent to Fothergill in 1770. Another image from the series was his seed vessel of the colocasia, which, like the colocasia drawing for Collinson, reverts to the model of the organic tableau. The spatial perspective is less fractured here. I mean, we seem to be pretty consistently eye level in the grass with the flora and the fauna. And I would say this is to focus our attention on the experience of time in this drawing. Here, Bartram portrayed a cluster of organisms with different lifespans, depicting them at various points in those spans. So the black root on the left displays its pale inflorescence, which lasts several months, while the dragonfly, that's kind of in the center at the center top of the drawing, lives maybe 8 weeks. On the right, a ruby-throated hummingbird, living up to 9 years, perches above a dried colocasia fruit. The fruit begins, as we saw, as a small, tender cone at the center of the lotus flower, but over the course of 6 weeks, doubles in size. The flower's petals fall away, and the fruit seeds mature over the course of another 6 weeks. Bartram depicted it at the culmination of this 3-month development as its desiccated husk finally spills its seeds on the earth. The seed vessel indicates emergent life, just as the snake swallowing a frog portends imminent death. This conjunction of different timescales in the drawing also recall a passage from The Microscope Made Easy, which not only addressed the way microscopy revealed the relativity of space, but also of time and of experience. As Baker indicated in the book's pages, the concept of temporal duration, like concepts of space and size, is in fact wholly comparative. Implicit here is the idea that plants and animals have their own experiences which compete with the naturalists whose perception of duration will never align with the specimens that he or she observes. Baker actually maintained that the naturalist could never truly know the perceptions, judgments, or understanding of another organism. He wrote, quote, "May not other creatures whose structure, organs, and way of living bear no resemblance to ours have sensations also different from ours, not only in degree, but kind?" They had their own experiences, wholly distinct from that of the human observer, into which the naturalist could only imaginatively project him or herself. Lying in the grass, we are no omniscient viewer, no perfected and superior biological species, but simply another organism in this wheeling web of subjectivity. The drawing's disruptiveness and instability are cast into higher relief when the work is compared to an earlier version that Bartram made, likely for Peter Collinson. This drawing similarly features a colocasia fruit and a snake consuming a frog, but here the positions of the fruit and the snake are flipped left to right, and 2 species of carnivorous Sarracenia replace the blackroot. The voracity of the snake and the gap-mouthed plant are balanced by the indication of fecundity and plenitude of the cornucopia-like Sarracenia leaf in the drawing's foreground. This drawing presents nature as tidily organized, if dynamic and potentially hostile, through this contained oval composition and the formal mirroring of snake and plant. So this is kind of like, it's got this oval shape, the way that it's composed. And I'd point out that the idea of this formal mirroring is something that has been discussed at length and actually introduced by Amy Myers, who's one of the foremost scholars of William Bartram and his art. Bartram's drawing for Fothergill is, however, much more compositionally dispersed than the one for Collinson. In breaking that close circularity, it portrays a natural world that is even more uncertain. It seems almost to parody the order found in the work of Bartram's early model, Mark Catesby. Catesby often used geometric forms in his composition, in the composition of his tableau, to articulate a stable natural structure and hierarchy, which you can see in this etching of bobolinks or rice birds. This is the plate that Bartram specifically quoted in his drawing of the marsh hawk or northern harrier. In this etching, Catesby depicted a hen on a bowed stalk of rice, delicately holding a grain in her mouth, while the cock perched below on a small half circle of earth is leaning forward to dip his beak into a clear pool. Birds and plant join together in this firm pyramidal composition that suggests a stable and accessible natural order. Notably, Catesby's accompanying text for this etching points to the possibility that the bird's gluttony might upend that natural order. He observed that they can consume a full 40 acres of rice fields, decimating a planter's crop. But he reassured readers that in doing so, these birds become excessively sluggish and easy prey, making them deliciously fat fowl for the planter to eat. So Catesby's verbal description of the rice birds seems intended to reinforce the sense of stability articulated by this etching. Humanity's supremacy is pointedly reasserted. In his drawing for Fothergill, Bartram upended that stable pyramidal composition found in Catesby, and instead we have this like cone-like fruit of the colocasia that's just kind of rolling about in the foreground on its side. The work offers no clear visual anchor, nor does it really direct the eye in any specific path through the drawing. Rather, our eyes ricochet among a group of plants and animals whose lived experience. By understanding that every organism experiences life in its own rich and vivid way, Bartram indicated that the order we impose on the natural world is just that, an imposition. He highlighted this point through the most startling element of the drawing, the grotesque yet humorous figure of the snake mid-swallow. This visual passage again recalls a textual one by Henry Baker, but in this instance, Bartram turns not to the microscope made easy, but to an attempt towards a natural history of the polyp, a tract dedicated to experiments on the freshwater polyp, or hydra. The polyp, now known as Hydra vulgaris, is part of a genus of organisms in the phylum Cnidaria, which includes sea anemones, corals, and jellyfish. It is essentially a simple tubular body with 4 to 12 tentacles extending from the perimeter of its sole orifice. The freshwater polyp is not stationary, as you can see, but actively pursues its prey with its tentacles. The organism became a hot topic for naturalists beginning in the 1740s, and in fact remains so to this day, since its combination of simplicity and sentience seems to defy the basic conceptual categories for organizing life. In his chapter on the polyp's stomach, Baker described its manner of snaring and pulling it into its mouth water fleas and worms that are far larger than itself. He said, quote, "When an animal is reported to swallow creatures larger than its own size, an explanation is highly necessary." He attributed this occurrence to the polyp's pliability and capacity for extension, observing that this was quite the same thing we see with snakes and lizards when they swallow frogs and toads whole. In including a similar visual passage in his drawing, Bartram underscored that the order we think pervades the natural world, that the large preys on the small, that plants, animals, and humans are graded by their complexity in a hierarchical chain of being, inevitably collapses the closer we look. In investigating and taking seriously the experiences of other organisms, William Bartram disrupted the traditional understanding of the natural world's order. This is not to say that he believed that there was no order, that all was chaos, but that there was no way for the naturalist to extract himself or herself from it, no way to adopt an Archimedean perspective and view nature from without. The naturalist perspective could only ever be a partial view, driven by earnest curiosity and complemented by wonder and imagination. This understanding of the natural world might suggest the impossibility of trying to represent it, that in the act of portrayal there will always be a misregistration between the world as it is and the world as it is portrayed. Yet Bartram chose to emphasize rather than obscure these slippages. I would like to conclude today with a look at his watercolor of the great yellow bream, which I see as a lovely articulation of this philosophy, this interest in slippages. In his travels, Bartram described this species of fish as one of the most beautiful there is, stunningly armored with shimmering scales that deceive the eyes, scales that reflect and refract the light so as to shift from translucent to opaque and a kaleidoscope of colors. In his text, he framed the fish's movements as themselves a type of drawing, an act in which the bream creates figures in the water. In an attempt to capture the bream's variability in this drawing, he traced its contour in ink, deploying a small series of small parentheses-like marks to create a pattern over the bream's surface. At the same time, he incorporated washes of pigment that only occasionally conform to the inscribed lines that shape and divide the fish's body. These crisp lines of his drawing, along with the dashes of russet, gold, pale blue, and green, at once suggest an order and structure to the natural world while also pointing up humanity's inability to ascertain the full scope of its structure. With his drawings, Bartram seems to say that we can only observe, wonder, and imagine the complexities of nature, all while remembering our own peculiar place in its infinitely fine web. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
So you said Bartram started drawing at 14. Did he receive any formal training?
I don't think I think there was one drawing master that I think he worked with a little bit, but not in any extended or intensive way. Yeah, I mean, he was always studying the visual world. He was very much studying the illustrations of Mark Catesby and of George Edwards. I mean, I would say he had a voracious eye, and he kind of trained himself in that respect. But the technique of drawing, maybe just a few lessons with a drawing master, but not much else. Yeah.
He really departed from the way that illustration was being done from the natural world in Europe,
Yeah.
and in giving his subjects agency and
Yeah.
subjectivity. And I wonder, he certainly had a unique experience. He was connected to his subjects in a way that the scientists working in labs weren't.
Yeah.
But was anyone else at the time? Was he really alone in sort of this new conceptual way of portraying these things, or were there others?
Well, I can't think of any other naturalist at this time who is animating their specimens in the same way that Bartram is. That is kind of making them appear so richly and vividly alive. I mean, there were ideas that other people were kind of questioning this great chain of being, this sort of hierarchical structuring of the natural world. That was there was a strand of thought where other people were questioning that, but I don't recall any. I can't think of anyone who visualized that in the way that Bartram did. So in a way, that the fact that he wasn't, technically trained, I think that kind of allowed him to do the things that he was doing. It kind of freed him to do that. Sam?
Yeah, how much? So Bartram was doing a lot of these drawings, and he was sending them back to the Natural History Museum or wherever he was seeing them.
Yeah.
Did they place orders, and did they tell him what they wanted to see?
Well, sometimes, for instance, the drawing there on the left, the Nalumba lutea, that was a specific request from Collinson. Other ones were not specific. John Fothergill was John Fothergill didn't even want him to head south. He wanted him to go to Canada. He's like, I don't know that I can grow those plants from the south in my garden, but he was just like. But I mean, I think John Bartram was just like, throw this guy a bone, okay? Like, my son's got to do something. And William Bartram really wanted to head back south, because the landscape was just so striking for him, and he really wanted to experience it. And so John Fothergill's like, fine, gave him some money, gave him. He would send paper and things like that, and then Bartram would just choose what to represent. Like, there was every so often they might make a specific request, but usually it was his own kind of like, ooh, this is nice, that sort of thing.
So just so you know some local flavor here, the yellow brim is called brim.
Oh, sorry.
That's how we pronounce it.
Okay.
And we know it as the warmouth.
Uh-huh.
And it takes about 6 of those to make a meal. I know from personal experience, but it's the most delicious fish that swims in the St. Johns River, as he acknowledges. So,
Okay, good to know.
just so you know.
Thank you. Oh, you got a question over here. It's on its way.
Thank you. Can I assume that all of the artwork that exists that Bartram did all went to Fothergill or Collinson, and that the that the images that we still have are in his whatever collection they're in? Are those the sources of those that remain today, the ones that were in those collections of Fothergill and Collinson?
Yeah, so there are 3 primary repositories for Bartram's drawings, but they are also in other locations. So there are the ones that are now. I don't believe they've been sold. They used to be owned by the Earl of Derby, but are now being sold through Eritor Galleries. And so those were the ones that were originally owned by Peter Collinson. And because the Earl of Derby was a collector of all sorts of natural history materials, so when Collinson died and his collections came up for sale, the Earl of Derby purchased them, and that's why they were there. So I had to take a bus to this great house outside of Liverpool, which is not. It's not the best way to get to an estate. Like I walked up to the gate. I'm like, "Hey, I'm here." And they're like, "Okay, come on." I'm like, "Well, I'm on foot, so I got to walk past the safari park." It was really not the best way, but I got there. But now you can just go to New York and see them. So that was one repository. The second one is at the Natural History Museum, and those were most of the collection drawings in Fothergill's collection. I believe when he died, Sir Joseph Banks bought them and then gave them to the Natural History Museum, or what would become the Natural History Museum. But not all of the drawings that went to Fothergill are at the Natural History Museum. Some of them, we believe, were purchased by Catherine the Great, so they could be in Russia, but we don't know. And then he made some drawings for the Duchess of Portland. Those could be out there in the ether somewhere in the world. So, keep your eyes open, everybody. And then the other major collection is at the American Philosophical Society, and those are drawings that he made. Most of those are drawings that he made for Benjamin Smith Barton when they were working on their Elements of Botany textbook. So those are the 3 major repositories. Eritor Galleries now, formerly Collinson, Natural History Museum, formerly Fothergill, and then American Philosophical Society, formerly Benjamin Smith Barton. But there's a smattering of ones elsewhere. So when one is found not in those collections, it is a very exciting day for all of us.
I don't know, someone else over there. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, and then the gentleman over here when you're done. So, yeah.
I'm probably going to butcher this little piece of history, but
Sure.
when he was 16, I think he met Jane Colden.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
Jane.
I've always
yeah.
wondered. I mean, she was like a pretty genius in her own right with her illustrations. I think insects mostly that she drew, right?
No, she did plants.
Plants. And
Yeah.
there was very little like on her. No one's ever really done much on her. I found just a little bit online, but I've wondered for years, like, what impact did she have on Bartram? Because I know she was older, but I think
Yeah.
I think they met when he was 16 or something.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. I can't remember if they met or not. I know Peter Collinson was writing to John and William, like, you should check her stuff out. It's really good. And I think, I mean, although I've talked about this with Amy Myers a little bit, and we're like, why was he so excited about her drawings? Because they're not that exciting, But I think what it was that she had really mastered the Linnaean system, and I think that was, that like she was really drawing them in accordance with the Linnaean system, and so that was what was really impressive. So I think that I think Collinson was like, maybe get William to do it like this, and Bartram did. He could draw like that, but then he was like, I want to do some other stuff, and he's like, I want to make it more exciting, and like that just, like he could do a standard natural history illustration, but he just wanted, like that seemed, I think, too inert and too lifeless, and he wanted to kind of make them more dynamic and meaningful, and also less realistic, because the world was so vibrantly alive for Bartram. To like render everything kind of in this very precise and mathematical way was inaccurate.
In the colored version, the seed vessel of the Kalikasia in 1769, there's little blocks to that lower left, and 90-degree angle, obviously human made. He avoided to put people, humans, into any of the other work. So I was wondering how that all correlates with everything else.
Yeah, that's a interesting little addition. And what I think it is I mean, I don't know for sure, but I think it's a reference to George Edwards. George Edwards did that a lot, and he would often put like these little kind of bricks or stones in the front, like kind of man-made objects. Also, Moses Harris did that. He was what was it? Was it the Aurelian? It was a journal of moths and butterflies or something. And so those plates, well, those were some plates that had this interesting kind of accretion of objects that were sort of all pulled together in a really curious way, sometimes with man-made objects. So I think it's a reference to or a citation of George Edwards or perhaps Moses Harris. And George Edwards would sometimes like put like his initials on the bricks, and so does Bartram.
I'm interested in this chronology of development of his artistic skills. There's the pictures after his first trip with his father, then the pictures that he made for his travels. Was there a third phase where he illustrated things that were not in either of those?
Yeah. So this is at the end of. These are the last drawings that he made. These were probably 1790s to 1801. He did drawings for Benjamin Smith Barton. Was a professor of materia medica at the University of Pennsylvania, and he was writing a book called Elements of Botany, and he was just like he wanted Bartram to do the illustrations, and so Bartram. He drew some specifically like sort of bespoke drawings for Benjamin Smith Barton. He used some earlier drawings that he had done and then kind of adapted them. But finally, Benjamin Smith Barton was like, "Oh, could you draw this?" And finally he said, "I can't. I'm really sorry. I can't. I'm having my niece write this letter to you because I can no longer see well enough to draw." So he stops drawing around 1801. 1801, 1803, I think. Yeah. All right. Well, if anybody has any questions, please come up and ask me. I'd love to. I obviously enjoy talking about William Bartram, as do all of you. So, thank you very much. How can you ask me that? How can you ask me that? My favorite? Okay. All right. I'm just going to go off the top. I'm going to say the Coach Whip Snake. Amazing. Love it. Love it. So good. So good. Okay. Thank you very much.